Run! Yes, a Jedi strength flows from the Force. But beware of the dark side. Anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the Force are they. Easily they flow, quick to join you in a fight. If once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. Consume you it will, as it did Obi-Wan's apprentice.
Vader, is the dark side stronger?
No. Quicker, easier, more seductive.
But how am I to know the good side from the bad?
You will know when you are calm, at peace, passive. A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack.
But tell me why I can't...
No, there is no why. Nothing more will I teach you today. Clear your mind of questions.
Hey, I get a hug? I'll take a hug. You bet. All right. You guys did such a nice job. Thank you so much for blessing us with your song today. So, I'll just talk over their heads, right? I am Emily Beltrame. I joined the ministry team here at Hope Ankeny this fall to lead children and students. And aren't they fabulous? I mean, seriously. Yeah, what a team. Christy and Tiffany, they are just like masterminds, thinking of ways to help kids know how much God loves them and feel like they belong here in God's family. It's so great. I love being on the team. I have to say, though, starting like right as things were kicking off for fall activities was a bit of a whirlwind. I didn't quite know everything I was getting into. Did you know that student ministry leads 7 retreats? 7. I don't know how we ever get anywhere. We are always retreating. Seriously. So I could talk about family ministry all day long. It's definitely my jam. But I thought I'd use The Empire Strikes Back to alert you to a couple other things that I'm very jazzed about. One of those is puppets. Whatever, weird, right? And Star Wars. I hope you'll agree with me that The Empire Strikes Back is one of the best Christmas movies. We've decided it qualifies because it starts on the snow planet of Hoth. Yes, see, I have agreement. It's so true. Really, though, it is the 3rd Sunday of Advent, and I get to preach on a passage that, like Star Wars, reminds us that in the battle between light and darkness, darkness will not prevail. So, spoiler alert, if you've gone 35 years without seeing the first trilogy, that's kind of where it ends up. But anyway, it's easy enough to say that light will prevail over darkness, but if you've been seeing what I've been seeing around lately, you and Luke and I, we'd all have good reason to ask, how can the Prince of Peace ever win this battle? And so it's kind of a cliche just to say that light's going to win. But if we dig into our reading from today, let's see where we might come out. The passage that our reader shared with you, it's from the Old Testament book of Isaiah, and it's a passage that Christians have loved ever since the early church. Kind of a fun fact, the early church leaders actually called the prophecies of Isaiah the 4th gospel because they saw Christ so clearly revealed in the prophecies that Isaiah wrote. But you know what else is kind of interesting? Half a millennium before Jesus was even born, Isaiah, before giving hope that Jesus was the Son of God, was giving hope to the people of God in his own place and time. I think it's really interesting to remember that the stories and the wisdom and the prophecies of the Old Testament would never have survived long enough to be appreciated by Christians if they weren't already meaningful to the people of God in their own time and place, to the ancient Jewish people. And those ancient Jews preserved a lot of Isaiah. It's actually the biggest book of prophecy in the Bible. And it came from a tumultuous time, a time when the nation of Israel, which had once been united and prosperous under great kings like David and Solomon, well, it had been broken apart, and it was under constant threat from competing empires around it. I don't want to bore you with like a review of the entire Old Testament, but these people considered themselves the people of God, and they did so for good reason. They thought they were chosen because they had been brought out of slavery. They had been sustained in the wilderness. They had been brought into this promised land to build a nation. God's favor had rested on them, so they had good reason to think that they were special and set apart by God, which made it a very dark day indeed when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem, tore apart the city, and destroyed the temple. What's more, to break up their will and their power, the people of God were sent away. They were exiled to live amongst their captors. And so things looked pretty lost and pretty hopeless for the people of God. For the obvious reason, no one wants to be conquered and sent out from your home, but it was worse for them because defeat threatened everything they believed about who God was and who they were. How could God be God if God's chosen people could be conquered? It made no sense to them. But Isaiah had already predicted quite a few things accurately. And so he had some credibility when he cast a vision for a new hope. Did you see what I did there? Okay, good. Isaiah had been right so many times that about some really important things. Like he had predicted that Babylon was going to fall. And he predicted that they were going to get to go home. And that happened. In fact, by the time that Jesus was born, they were back in Jerusalem and the temple had been rebuilt. And since Isaiah had been right so many times, these prophecies that he had given, they were really considered a trustworthy reassurance that God's plan was not over yet, that there would be this light that would break into the darkness, this new king that would come. But it hadn't happened yet until it did. So I told you how Isaiah was already the most prolific prophet of the Old Testament. Can anybody guess where else Isaiah shows up the most? It's kind of obvious. Come on, guys. The New Testament. The New Testament. Isaiah is the most quoted and alluded to prophet of the New Testament. It turns up dozens and dozens of times. So when Jesus came, everyone noticed that this prophet who had given hope to the exiles, who had been right about so many things, that prophet seemed to have also somehow known that Jesus was coming. So just look at this. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. So that was from Isaiah, right? But now, doesn't it seem like Jesus himself is endorsing Isaiah? Look what Jesus said. Jesus spoke to the people once more and said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness, because you will have the light that leads to life. Isaiah and other prophets, they foretold details of Jesus' birth, of his suffering, his death, and his resurrection. And that gave the people of his day hope. And it gives us hope today. I remember the first time that I learned about the prophecies like Isaiah's. You might think that I heard about it like sitting in church one Sunday during Advent, like some of the young people here today, right? I mean, after all, my grandparents were missionaries, and I idolized them. When we were at Granny and Grandpa's house, everything was about church and Jesus. And so, naturally, I really wanted to belong at church. But I don't know if any of you felt this way when you were a kid at church, if you were, but it felt to me like every single time we went to church, They just wanted to remind me that I was a sinner. And that if I didn't want to go to hell, I had better ask Jesus to save me. And I can tell you, man, I did what they asked. I asked Jesus to save me practically every single time I went to church. Over and over again, I'd answer the same questions. Do you know you're a sinner? Yes, I do. Do you know you can't get to heaven on your own? Yes, I know that. Do you want Jesus to help you get into heaven? Yes, please. Like, who says no to that? Who doesn't want to go to heaven? But then my family, they moved like 1,000 miles away. And they left Granny and Grandpa behind. And they left the church behind too. And so that was all I knew. I knew all have sinned. The wages of sin is death. And the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. That's what I had to go on. I was set for eternity, right? Because I had said yes. And yet that did not do much to push back the darkness. In my home, there was not justice. There was not peace. There was not grace. And so I knew that there had to be more. So when I got to college, one of the first things I did actually was I went and found a church. And I'd probably gone there for a few times before that, but I really remember my first Easter. And there's a reason for that. I was kind of proud of myself as a college student. On that particular Sunday, I came to church early. So I was a little shocked when there were a lot of cars already in the parking lot. That seemed weird. And then as I came inside, the pastor was already like partway through his sermon. So I was really like, what is going on here? I slid myself into a back pew and I tried to work out what was going on. I lived a very analog life in college. Like I didn't have even a TV in my dorm room. So I had completely missed the memo that in that particular year, Spring Forward was on Easter Sunday. Oops. So here I am, I'm sitting in the pew. I'm totally embarrassed about everything I don't know. And the pastor gets my attention when he says, Easter is more important than Christmas. And I'm like, dude, like one thing I know is that Christmas is super important. But then he says, he's like, Christmas wouldn't have meant anything if it hadn't been for the empty tomb on Easter. What the hollyhocks? Jesus came back to life? No wonder my grandparents were obsessed with him. I couldn't believe it. And then in Bible study, I heard about the prophecies. I heard that his arrival had been foretold hundreds of years before he even came. My mind was blown. It changed everything. Do you know how relieved I was to find out that faith wasn't just all about how pathetic my shortcomings were or how scary hell was? In that moment, and along the way since, I've realized more and more that God's love for me, God's love for all of us, is this unfolding story that started thousands of years ago and is still being revealed in these beautiful and complex ways that are not just about me and my mistakes. My whole story is interwoven with the ancient Israelites, with the disciples, with Isaiah, with the church that came before me, with my grandparents, with the kids that are coming along behind and the generations to come. It is all about this light that God's love is shining into a world that is dark without it. And like the New Testament writers who could look back on the prophecies of Isaiah and at Jesus and Jesus' life and recognize that God had woven together all these threads of history and prophecy and Jesus' birth and resurrection to reveal who Jesus really was. Well, just like that, when I looked back over my life, I could see all these moments where God had been shining his light on me through his grace and through his people. And there had been so many times when God had held back the darkness for me, when I didn't even understand who the source of the light was. I realized who I really was. God's beloved child. Not just because I asked Jesus to be my Savior, but because God had been already loving me all along. And then, yada, 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 here I am. I end up a minister of the gospel who gets to share that love and that light with kids and young people. Man, I love being able to do that. But I love it here too. I love getting to share it with all of you when I get the chance, church. Because I came to understand something back then that is still true for me and for all of you. Jesus didn't come to condemn our darkness. Jesus came to give us light that leads to life. And boy, do we need it. I mean, especially around here right now. These are the darkest weeks of the year. I've been trying to be optimistic and tell myself that actually Iowa is really beautiful right now. Because all day long, it's either sunrise or sunset. And as if it's not enough, the usual challenge of short winter days, everyone's just carrying a lot of extra weight right now, aren't we? I mean, I don't want to be a big downer here, but I certainly don't want to gloss it over. Let's be real, like collectively and individually. We're just carrying this extra weight of worry and grief. I mean, if you were lucky enough in the last 2 years not to suffer a major loss, I guarantee that you still understand what I'm saying when I talk about death by 1,000 paper cuts. And when so many people are dealing with such tremendous losses, it just doesn't even feel right to complain about like the little inconveniences and cancellations that have just been a part of life for the last couple years. I mean, Pastor Scott was totally right last weekend when he reminded us that this place and time, this is about as comfortable as it gets for human beings. I mean, even around the world, throughout human history, but even around the world today, there are so many people who have it so much harder than we do. And yet, that might be part of what makes it so hard. I mean, I'm middle-aged now, and I can tell you, I mean, I even remember 9/11, and I can tell you, there has never been a season of such extended disruption and challenge and conflict and, honestly, death. So I don't want to diminish the very real darkness that feels like such a threat to each of our lives right now. But I also want to point you to something else that was in this passage today. For a child is born to us. A child. Now, Isaiah is making a pronunciation about a coming king in a way that was pretty standard in his day. But I just couldn't miss it when I was preparing to preach today. That when the world was shrouded in darkness, when people were desperate for hope, a child was the answer. Not the problem, the answer. The answer. I spent my middle and high school years in the Detroit area. So what happened in Oxford, Michigan kind of resonated hard for me. I actually have a lot of old friends that are teachers in the greater Detroit area. So I saw this post from a teacher in Oxford, Michigan, and I don't know Jack Gray personally, but this is what he shared, or part of it. Many of you have been asking me what you can do and how you can help with the tragedy that has beset our community. I don't have a great answer for you, but I can tell you that it has been a tough profession to work in for a while now. We've been really hurting for people like substitutes, kitchen workers, bus drivers, you name it. You really want to help? Take a day out of your month, or perhaps your week, and volunteer or substitute at your local school. If there's one thing I'm sure of, it's that we were already having trouble getting people working in schools. And I don't think it's going to get any better after this. I understand if you're hesitant. Believe me, I do. But if you're asking me how you can help, that's how you can really do it. As someone who's been parenting and leading students through the massive culture shift of the last 20 years, I have some pretty strong opinions about young people. And let me start here. They're amazing. When I was a kid, we had 3 channels on our TV. And everybody was worried that we were going to hurt our eyes. These kids, they are coming of age in an era where their every interaction is both assessed and baited by an algorithm that is literally tampering with their developing brain chemistry. And it's taken a toll on them. That toll started to accelerate around 2012 when iPhones made social media ubiquitous. You can't miss the pattern. After spending the last decade trying to help young people find a healthy balance between their real life and their digital lives, we all of a sudden hit this season these last couple of years where if you happen to notice that your kid is talking to another human being over FaceTime or Zoom, or even that redheaded stepchild of social media, Snapchat, instead of being annoyed and wanting them to put their phone away, you rejoiced that they were interacting with other humans. And that's been not so great for us. I mean, it's not so great for us, right? And our brains are pretty much fully formed. So imagine what this has been like for them. The Surgeon General released a warning this week about the mental health crisis that is happening for young people. In truth, the folks who work with students have been noticing that there is this loss in social maturity amongst young people. They've lost about 2 years of it. I ran a camp this summer. We had an epidemic of nausea and headaches for the first 2-3 days of camp. And what we concluded was that our kids were all going through physical withdrawal because they kept talking about how uneasy they felt not having their phones. But you know what? I'm worried about them. I am. And there's more problems than just the phones. But this is the thing I know. I don't have to be afraid of the dark. And neither do they. And neither do you. Because you know, it's not so good to be fearful. Remember what Yoda said?
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Thank you, my little green puppet friend. Yoda's got it going on, right? I don't know about you, but I've seen about as much anger and hate and suffering as I could stand lately. We don't need more of that. We need the light. We need to be the light. It feels like in this time of crisis, when our young people are have the most need, everybody's running the other way. Schools are strapped. Classes are meeting in the library because there's no adult to oversee their classrooms. School counselors are so busy lining up resources for the highest risk kids that they don't even have time to see the kids who just have everyday stress. And it makes my heart ache. But you know what else I see? I see light. You know where I see light? I see it amongst the kids and the adults who are not afraid of the dark. If you have never been around here for a night of Power Life and Ignition, if you've never served during a session of Hope Kids, let me tell you, you are missing out. For instance, do you know what our students do? Like every single session, every single week, we've never coached them to do it. It's totally spontaneous. They erupt in applause every time for their Bible reader. I mean, take a look at this.
In his name, Father.
Can you imagine if we adults were as for each other, as encouraging of one another as these students are? It just makes me so proud of them every single time. I was sitting next to a family a while back, and I overheard them talking about foster care. They foster kids. And I heard someone ask this kid, how would you feel if your family, permanently added those kids? Like, what if you adopted kids into your family? And this kid just lit up. He was like, I would love that. I love these kids. It would be awesome if they were my siblings. And then his face fell. And I thought, well, what's wrong? And he said he was worried that if they were to adopt foster kids into their family, that they'd be over ratio and they wouldn't be able to foster more kids. And he hated the idea that his family wouldn't be able to offer a home to a kid that needed it. Man, doesn't that light the darkness for you? It sure did for me. Yeah. I asked these leaders, I asked them for highlights from this fall, and they told me these great stories about how their students had overwhelmed the cupboard with donations. Some of them had cleaned it up and even left notes for the folks who would come to use it. They told me how shocked they were at the way that the kids and the students embraced the giving campaign this fall. But one leader said something that I just think really illustrates why I love this church, this ministry. Because he said he couldn't pick a highlight because for him, it was just being there. The energy, the presence of the group, the being together, that it was just incredible to be a part of. You guys, when the rest of the world is running away, you are running in there to be with these kids. God bless you, because it is amazing to get to witness and be a part of. And what he said, it made me think about exactly why God had to be born as a baby for us to experience light. What Isaiah foretold, what the disciples experienced, what we get to glimpse when God's people are truly being the light for one another. It isn't a TikTok or a text or a Zoom meeting with the divine. Nobody misses it because their camera's off and they're playing with their cat. Because it's the incarnation. It is God with us in the flesh. We experience light because we experience matter. God wasn't just with us in spirit, as awesome as that is. God came to be with us in person. God came as a child, and it changed everything. So if we want to be light to our neighbors, to our families, to kids and students who are aching from 1,000 paper cuts and don't quite understand why they're so sad, we need to embrace the awkwardness of incarnation. What if, instead of isolation and pseudo-connection, the quicker, easier, more seductive fix, as Yoda would say? What if we challenge ourselves to really get into our own skin? What would it be like to do something with our bodies besides click and type and drive? What if we made it a priority to go for walks, to play games, to deal a hand of cards, to light a candle together? You don't even have to be ready to rejoin the crowds, although you're here at 9:30, so you must be okay with the crowd. But you can be the light to those who aren't ready for that too. I mean, there are all these opportunities this Advent. There's Journey to the Light this week. You can go drive through, or you could volunteer and be a part of it. We're actually having mask-required option for some of our Christmas Eve services. You could invite someone who's still weary to come in the flesh and light a candle together for Christmas Eve. These opportunities are here. The other thing, of course, that I would love, I'd be really delighted, is if you reached out to me or Christy and said, I want to witness this next generation in person because they sound great, and I can tell you, they are. The world is dark, but Jesus is the light of the world. The King is coming, and his reign will never end.